everyone. This is Raphael.
I'm Loryn.
We're the Pacheco siblings, and welcome to the Hypercube podcast, a talk show in which two siblings converse about anything and everything. Alrighty. So, diving back in with season 2.
Getting the ball rolling.
Yeah, we had a great first episode, albeit a bit longer, so I'm sure this one won't be too much of a diatribe either.
We said.
Because we're going to talk about AI. Well, that being said, like between the last season of Hypercube that we recorded and this season, there's been a bit of an AI explosion.
A little bit.
That we did not get to talk about at all last time because, we were seeing the early developments of it, but I don't think we could have foreseen how big of a thing it would have become. Or I think we could have foreseen how big it would become, rather, but like I just more so didn't expect it to happen within that year.
and also like the public reaction to it as well was completely, might have been expected, but the scale was unexpected.
This is true.
Literally everybody suddenly had an opinion about it.
This is true. I did not expect it to project so far into the mainstream so quickly. It's mostly the publicity that was the most surprising.
Yeah, for sure. Because obviously this was going to be huge and everyone in the industry was already talking about it being a big thing, changing how we're going to talk about art from the from this point forward. But now even people who don't even have a stake in it are talking about it.
Yeah. And I think that's due in large part to the wide-reaching implications that are already apparent, because it's now starting to, I think its repercussions are most visible in the art world, but it's really becoming apparent that this is something that's going to affect literally every industry.
Yeah, if you do something, it will be affected by this.
Yeah, exactly. Which is fascinating because, I mean, as we even say this, right, like we both use Pixel phones, Google Pixels, and like the Magic Eraser tool has like just made its way onto my phone. And I'm like, I literally have just powerful AI tools right here in the palm of my hands now that I didn't even have to opt into, right? Like it just happens. Yeah, it just happens. It's just there, right? That's just the world we live in now. It's the air we breathe. So, but before we to kind of dodge around as we do on this show, the kind of alarmist rhetoric, because I think it's very easy to fall into the category of the robot apocalypse is upon us kind of headlining, and I think we kind of make a deliberate note of not being alarmist and in general, but especially on this podcast where we are kind of making our public stage. So because I think there definitely is, not to say that there's no cause for alarm. This is definitely going to be a drastic societal change, as it already has been, but will continue to be going forward. That will definitely upset the order of some things. However, I don't think it is like the art killing thing that it's often made out to be. And I think I'm going to kind of get into my reasons why throughout this. We've had our own conversations about this as well, of course, but yeah, it's very interesting. But I guess sort of what's your kind of bird's eye view perspective in the current AI revolution that we're currently in? For
sure, it is going to change how we just approach life and productivity and creativity and pretty much anything moving forward. It's going to change how we approach workflows. I don't think I should say it this way. I am as scared of the oncoming robot apocalypse as horses were of the oncoming train apocalypse. Which is to say, horses they weren't afraid of trains.
Yeah.
But it's a constant innovation and like scary edge use cases of innovation that is kind of like being exploded and like kind of brought into the limelight. Like it's a completely normal thing. It's just gotten better. It's been around for a very long time. You've been using this for a very long time. It's just that now it's becoming more available to all kinds of people. And because it's becoming available to all kinds of people with different points of view, with different goals, with different agendas, now all have access to the same tools. And that's kind of what's the most scary, I think, is not the tool itself. Obviously, I'm not really too afraid of tools. They've never done anything on their own. I'm afraid of the people who are in charge of handling those tools. I'm afraid of the people who are developing those tools. If somebody who is developing a generative AI develops a generative AI for the sole purpose of deceiving the public, I am not afraid of generative AI. I'm afraid of that person deceiving the public.
Right.
And that's basically my entire stance on it.
Yeah, yeah. And hold on a sec. Siren.
Oh. It's okay. We can use AI to get rid of it.
This is very true. That was one of the very early AI cases,
Yeah.
was that that great noise removal, which is probably the best possible use of AI, in my opinion. I feel like that should stay in just for
That should have stayed in.
But and it's interesting because that's actually you're actually pretty consistent about that worldview. You actually apply that to a wide variety of things. That
Yeah.
you never blame tools for users.
Yeah.
So that being said, yeah, for me, there's actually one thing that you said to me a long time ago that might be one of the most profound things you've ever said. You've said a lot of profound things to me, but
I think you've said that several times in this podcast.
maybe
Which one is it
so.
this time, Raph? Which profound thing is the most profound thing I've ever said this time? Because I don't remember it.
But you said a profound thing to me a while back that has really kind of stuck with me. And for me is the reason why I feel, I guess, such a calm about this sort of thing, which is you'd said to me once, anything that can be done by a machine should not be done by a human.
Right. That one. Yes.
Yes. And let me elaborate on why that provides such a sense of comfort to me throughout this. Is because a lot of the worry is this idea of AI tools replacing artists and taking artists' jobs. Now, replacing artists, I suppose, is mostly what I'm going to address. No doubt is going to kill a lot of jobs, but I don't necessarily view that as an entirely bad thing, or at least an inherently bad thing. I think it can be just
in the short term. In the short term, it will be. The immediate loss of somebody's rotoscoping job will be harmful for them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right now. However, in the very long term, humanity in general will benefit.
Yeah. So let me explain the reasons why that point has been such a comfort to me, because it really is kind of an aphorism in a way, right? Like I think it is kind of like a universal truth when you really abstract it, because on the surface level, it sounds very contentious. It sounds very controversial, and it sounds like something I would disagree with. But I think when you boil it down...
because that's just how I am.
Because you have a way of being provocative. But I think when you boil it down to what you mean when you say that, right? When you elaborated it to me, I'm like, okay, that actually I think is just a universal truth, right? That anything that can be done by a machine should not be done by a human. It's one of the reasons why I'm not... Well, I currently, as part of my day job, work with automation. And it's one of the reasons why, even though automation is like a huge, scary thing for taking jobs, well, I'm not too afraid of that either. Because having done the non-automated version of my job as well, it is just like, it is not blameworthy why anybody would want to move to automation, right? Like you are just multiplying efforts. But the thing is, automation is not very automatic. It still requires human operators because nothing is mechanically perfect. Physics is wonky, and electronics and mechanics are wonky. So nothing is ever going to be perfectly consistent every time. So human operators are always going to be needed to supervise and operate. And so it's the same sort of thing, though, with when it comes to AI. So with that, because basically it is just like a giant automator, right? A very powerful automation tool. So basically what it boils down to kind of get at my core essence, then I'll go into more specifics. Yeah, lay my groundwork, is the fact that basically... Like you said, if anything machine can do should not be done by a human. And a lot of people kind of look at the AI artwork that can be pumped out, right? Like you look at any of these art generator AIs, right? They could create pretty lifelike images or pretty stunning replications of somebody's artistic style. And it's like, wow, it's like, look what this AI, what this machine can do. In a way, it's like somebody can look at that and be like, okay, that is... Like, are you saying that a human should not create illustrations because an AI can create an illustration that looks just like theirs? And I think that's actually a very reductive way to think about art, because
it's a very knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, very knee-jerk reaction. I think most drastically, it's a reductive way to look at art, because essentially what you're saying is you're reducing the artist to a series of brushstrokes that they made and a series of layers on their canvas, if they're a digital artist or what have you, right? And to me, that's not what an artist is. An artist is more than just their techniques. An artist is intentionality. AI can perfectly replicate art techniques. It could perfectly replicate a person's style, their specific brushstrokes. But the AI did not live that artist's experience. It has not gone through their emotional turmoil. It has not gone through their life experience, and therefore does not use those techniques with the same intentionality. And it never can, because it hasn't lived their life. And what it basically lacks is the voice of that artist, which is what distinguishes an artist, right? Like, you can look at if you reduce an artist to just their body of work, then sure, an AI can replace your body of work. But it is, in a very literal sense, soulless, right? Like, the artist is not their body of work. This is, I think, maybe this is a bit of a thesis statement for me, because this is perhaps part of why we place such an emphasis on who the artist is when we're doing our film school episodes, or when we're breaking down any work of art, right? We often start the conversation with, who is the artist? Where does this lie in their body of work, or things like that, right? Because artists are humans. And what is art but an expression of our humanity and an expression of our personhood and the telling of our story? And that is something that an AI cannot do. So when we say, like, anything that can be done by a machine should not be done by a human, right? That is not to say that art should be paused because AI can generate very artistic seeming images. But because that is not ultimately what an artist is doing, right? I've heard some people express the same concern, like, say, in the music industry, right? Now we have generative AIs that could produce very interesting series of notes or chord progressions. And it's like, oh, okay, but what about composers? What about, people who are pianists and do session work or things like that? Will they be replaced by AI? It's like, well, if all that they do is hit keys, then they can be replaced by AI. But I don't know if you believe that everything they are doing, the only thing they are doing is hitting keys on a keyboard, right? That is not the only thing that they are doing. There's a human intentionality behind it that cannot be mimicked. And that being said, I think ultimately the jobs that are going to be replaced by AI are the jobs that are essentially the soulless art jobs that
the grunt work
that can be replaced. For example, I think in the voiceover world, right, which is one we're pretty steeped in, I think pretty strongly that commercial voiceover work is going to go bye-bye in the next couple of years. I think because that is, and I'll tell you why. It's actually quite a very simple reason, which is that the corporates who are in charge of those projects basically do not want right, a human being on the other end, right? They would be perfectly satisfied with a robot reading those lines, right? Because because
they just need a voice delivering the lines, getting the message into a recording that they can put out onto the airwaves.
Basically,
that's the only thing that matters.
Yeah, right. Because it is soulless work, right? It is it is something that can be what makes good commercial voiceover can just as easily be done by a robot as it can be done by a human, right? Like, you can.
Yeah, like, do you really think your voiceover friend who's who did that ad read for, like, I don't know, a chocolate milk? Do you think they really believe in that product? Do you think they're doing that for expressive reasons, right? Like, is that really an act of self-expression, or is it just a paycheck, right? But that's where the difficulty comes in, though, right? And that's what makes this a complex human situation, is that paychecks are also important for human sustainability here in the West. So, not to say that we should be celebrative of the fact that those jobs are going bye-bye, but I think it is a simple truth that those commercial voiceover work is going to become a thing of the past very soon. Because, because the kinds of people who work in marketing are the kinds of people who would be satisfied with what an AI can present, which is going to be much cheaper than hiring a person. Every single time it's going to be cheaper. And
again, these are corporate decisions. Yeah. And we know how corporates are all too well.
The numbers don't lie.
And so I think corporate commercial voiceover work is going to quickly not become a viable option for professional voice actors, unfortunately, because we've often talked about the fact that actors are more than just line readers, right? What makes an actor is the, getting into psychology of a character, intentionality of their decisions, right? Making decisions is one of the core things that we often say an actor does. And we've been very vocal about that, right? That actors are more than just line readers. That being said, commercial voiceover is just line reading.
It's just
line reading.
That's all it is.
Right.
Yeah.
And because it's just line reading, it can be replaced by an AI, because there are even some voice generative AIs that can have very high degrees of customizability in the way they intonate and the way that and the kinds of voices that they can project and dialects and all that. So pretty much you can reduce the commercial voiceover job into a series of sliders. And as soon as it's, and already we saw, even before we had good generative voice AI, people use, generated voices for commercials.
Robocalls and stuff like that, where
exactly.
The only thing you need is a human voice, a human sounding voice. No, not even a human, a voice.
Any voice.
It's because there were times where this is obviously a robot and it's delivering me text over a non-visual medium, right?
Yeah.
It's that's all it is.
Yeah, pretty much. And so, but then what then remains, right? What is it that humans do? And I think that's ultimately is going to be what's left, right? After what's left after the reduction of these new powerful tools is the things, basically the only art that's going to be left is the art that humans should be doing, right? Which is making art where we can tell our own stories, make our decisions, and basically express ourselves. And as tools to that end, I think they're very powerful. Like you said, for example, in visual effects is a huge business that's being upset by this right now as well, right?
Yeah,
lots of rotoscoping jobs are definitely going to go bye-bye in the next couple of years. And that's unfortunate in a lot of ways, because that was like the entry-level VFX job, because it requires a lot of people, a lot of man hours, and was basically
just working away at a project.
Just grunt work.
Frame by frame.
Right. And so, I think there's definitely something to mourn about that, but at least in a fair world, so this might not be the case, but in a just world, there will be something that will fill that gap. I'm not sure what it is. I honestly, at this point, believe we can't predict what it's going to be. That's going to be the new entry-level VFX work. But in a just world, there should be something filling that gap, because the way industry scales, right? We're already seeing, for example, with some of the experiments Corridor has been doing, right, with their, for example, anime rock paper scissors series, that AI, when applied properly, is a tool that can scale up a production, right? That can make a small indie production access a level of production value that it couldn't before. And I think, like with many tools, that's going to be one of its, I think, most powerful proper uses and ethical uses. Yeah,
well, that's all a tool is a force multiplier.
Basically, yeah.
A tool is just, it exists to extend a human's ability. Like, we are the users of the tool, and the tool gives us a mechanical advantage or some other kind of advantage that we cannot get to on our own, right? The hammer was invented because we needed to hit things into the ground really hard, and we needed a mechanical device to do that. If we take that same analogy, any tool is finding the right hammer for the right nail. So what is, we're seeing this nail being just bludgeoned by this hammer currently, of these grunt work jobs being consumed by AI, but it's not the only thing out there. And of course, like you were saying, there's no way to predict, because it is so the entertainment industry, especially the industry of media, it's so wild and it's so unpredictable. It can go any different direction, and we can't predict what's going to happen next, what's going to fill that gap. But what we can say is that whatever's going to fill that gap will be maybe not this time around, maybe not the next time around, as more and more things get consumed by AI. But whatever we are left with will be a more human-centered job.
Yes.
And I kind of want more human-centered jobs. I'm tired of working in a factory.
That's actually a great way of putting it, actually. I love that wording, because that's essentially what it is, right? Like you said, back to your phrasing of, anything that can be done by a machine, right? What we're basically, every time we've had quantum leaps in technology or advancements in our tools as storytellers, it's a disruption at first, but when the dust settles, there are only improvements to our capabilities that allow us to do the more human part of the storytelling, right?
Yeah.
Like, the transition from, for example, analog to digital when it comes to like film versus like digital shooting for filmmakers, right? And being able to do chroma keying at the click of a button instead of doing a chemical process,
insane.
Right? Like that just multiplied our productivity. And yet it didn't kill like VFX jobs. It didn't, make us shoot, any less or, do any less creative visuals. It just made that process easier, and it just made it so more creative.
In fact, the opposite happened. We got more visual effects. We got more creative with our visual effects, right? Like before, when you had thousands of artists working many hours on chemical processes to be able to do the thing that old school masking was. I'm not quite sure how it works exactly, but I kind of get the idea. Like my partner was in a photography class where they did old school darkroom photo processing, right? It took hours to get a single photo done, but it was like really cool. That same thing applied over frames, applied over an entire project for like an effect, just one, right? A classic split screen effect, let's say, right? Now, an entire film could be done entirely in CG with like effects that those people couldn't even imagine. But the thing is, because that job got automated, of being able to, pull out a single color to replace it with something else, chroma keying and rotoscoping, because of that, more projects are being made with those effects because they got faster. So if you have a rotoscope artist now whose job is to manually keyframe in a roto mask on like a Marvel character or something like that, their job in the future might not be exactly what they're doing now. But let's say their job in the future, instead of being a rotoscope artist, they are a rotoscope technician. Their job is to set the parameters, right? And make sure that one scene is finished. And one artist might be in charge of one entire scene instead of a team of artists being in charge of an entire scene. Now it just might be the one guy, which means if you wanted to keep all those people hired, keep all them employed, now you have 10 different movies, 20 different movies, 30, 40, 100 different movies, all being done at the same time. 100 different scenes, all being done at the same time, instead of 100 artists on a single scene. Yeah.
Which just means more art.
Way more. The only problem is we need more people in the positions of power to be able to make the decisions, instead of having all of the technicians, what might become CG technicians. They need to be elevated to the points of they're now the ones creating the decisions, making their own projects. That's what's going to happen. The people who are mad that AI is going to take over the industry are the ones who are making all the money off of it. If you are in the industry and you are just kind of slaving away at an entry-level job, I'm not saying you should be rejoicing, because it's going to hurt for a while. It's going to be kind of painful, because the system isn't set up for this kind of disruption. You're going to be out of a job, and it's going to hurt. But your kids will be able to do essentially what you did and make much more money and be able to make much more fulfilling projects.
Yeah. Well, I think, and that's the thing, is the difficult thing about this is that I think the issues that everybody has that feel threatening about this AI revolution are ultimately human-centered issues, not technology-centered issues, right? Because essentially it's like industry and management issues, right? That are what make it scary. Because again, it is creating disruptions. And like I said, with the commercial voiceover example, right? That's commercial voiceover doesn't have to go bye-bye. I'm just saying it's inevitable that the people who make decisions will make it go bye-bye, right? That's ultimately still a human problem, right? Like we could choose to continue to employ humans for voiceover. I just happen to know that it's not going to work out that way just by what I know about the industry. Yeah. And the psychology of how a lot of the marketing producers work. Right. And who's to say how it could, change in the future. But that being said, these quantum leaps in technology inevitably come about every so often. Right. Yeah. And we've had a number of huge industrial revolutions. And I actually posed the argument to you at one point that what's so disruptive about this current moment is that we are in the middle of a transition to a new industrial revolution, right? And I think the information age is coming to a close, and I think the AI jump that we're currently experiencing is representing the end of the information age and transitioning to a new technological or a new industrial revolution. So, and I think the next one is very much going to be centered around this kind of technology, right? About the kind of machine learning based technology that is now emerging, that has been in the works for over 10 years now, right? I think you and I, who follow technology and science quite closely, saw the long buildup that we had to get to this moment, because it wasn't by any means unforeseen.
Yeah, this didn't happen overnight.
There was a lot of steps that were happening along the way that we were both kind of keeping tabs on. But again, when the boom, I think we're just now seeing the boom that was inevitably coming based on all of the different prior technologies that were being developed. But yeah, I feel like that's what's really disruptive about this, is we are experiencing an age change, right? We are experiencing a new industrial revolution, and it's going to change things in the way that all the other industrial revolutions did, right? And even down to the first industrial revolution, there was a lot of anxiety in that time, if you look back on accounts of it, right? Like the transition to high densely populated urban centers and factory work and mass production, that was a scary new thing to society that had largely only known, trade workers and farms and things of that nature. And now all of a sudden, like, the very social fabric was being reordered. And so, but
sometimes literally the social fabric.
Yeah. When it comes to textile workers, for sure. Which, oof, yeah. I mean, there is that.
They got kind of obliterated.
Yeah, I was just going to say, these things have happened frequently throughout history. And I think it's just scary to be living through one. And I think there's some solace we can take in historical precedent, though. I think a lot of times there's a lot of social issues that I think we could take solace in historical precedent for. Yeah. And I think a lot of current anxieties can be quelled with a better understanding of our history. I think that's
just in general, I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah. Just in general. Yeah. Like, I think especially like a lot of fear-based rhetoric on the religious right, for example. I think that a lot of that just has to do with a lack of understanding of like the church's history and things of that nature, and how it's just like, we're really not seeing too many new things. Just history is kind of a cycle and a pendulum. And I think really, so with anything, I think there's a lot of solace to be taken in historical precedent. And I think it's the same here. This is a new industrial revolution. It's very scary, but there's solace in the fact that we've been through this before and humanity has survived it every single time. But things changed.
Because even if history doesn't repeat itself, it will always rhyme.
Exactly.
Everything happens on a cycle of, in one way or the other, right? Extreme progress, and then like extreme, followed by extreme conservatism.
Oh, right.
Right now, we are swinging hard into progress and moving forward at lightning speed. And that's just because of everything that's our history of progress, which I guess is a weird thing to say. It's getting faster and faster and faster. We're getting more breakthroughs more often, closer to each other, which is kind of also why it feels kind of scary, because it just seems like just yesterday we were getting used to a new normal, and now we have to change again.
Right.
It's exhausting, to be honest. And I get that. However, there's a lot about how we as a species, I think, need to change in order to make that a little less scary, like just culturally, because we need to stop thinking about things on a product level of things, of like, oh, this is going to affect productivity. This is going to affect the kinds of things workers can do. But what if, instead of thinking about it that way, what if we started thinking about like human experience, right? What if instead of thinking about this through a product-centered society, we started thinking about it through a human-centered society. And instead of thinking about how workers are going to be out of work, we start changing the way we do things so that humans will thrive instead of busy bees.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a fair point and the economic angle, like obviously it's hard to discount because it's so central to our well-being.
It's baked into how we think about problems.
Yeah.
Which is, it's not productive, which is what is kind of counterintuitive, seeing as it's all about production.
Right. But like you said, the things kind of after, radical progress, things tend to find a balance, right, given time. And it'll be very curious to see where the balance of this current revolution lies, which I guess is part of the prediction we're trying to do here. Hence why we're titling this AI in the Future of Art. But the fact of the matter is, again, we have survived every major boom like this before, technologically, and no doubt we'll find a way to survive this one. But what that will look like is, remains to be seen. However, and again, that's the scary and that's the anxious part, right? Is that uncertainty.
Yeah.
But like you said, the fact that, we do think about it from like a product centered, very capitalistic sort of way here in the West, especially. And I think in many ways that's hard to, that's not something that can be disentangled overnight, right? No, because of the way our incentive structures are set up and because of the way that the fact that we all need to eat. And there's,
and currently food costs money.
Yeah. Currently food costs money. And so, those things are definitely hard to disentangle overnight, but hopefully that can be a general generational mindset shift, because I think we have seen corrective balances from this in the past, in the very recent past, right? Like, for example, I think Fight Club, for example, is a film that I actually once heard phrased in that generational way as well. Like, it is very much like a Gen X centered story that was kind of a rebuttal to the very commercialistic sort of 50s mindset that Gen X inherited from their parents, right? And kind of a rebellion against that materialism, right? And I think that pendulum keeps swinging. I think that in many ways we're seeing a broader rejection of that amongst new generations that are forthcoming. And I think because again, like, there's so much of life in America has been kind of career oriented, right? And career centric for such a long time. And I think we're kind of part of a series of generations that have felt the burnout of that, right? And started to like go through those phases of doing things in the proper order, going to college, getting your jobs, and then feeling the burnout and the lack of fulfillment of it, but also kind of seeing it, I think, in those intergenerational dynamics, right? I think a lot of people were simply new to be skeptical of that just from seeing how their parents turn out, right? And so I don't know, maybe what you're talking about is a general generational mindset shift that is going to become more prevalent, in which case, when that generation becomes the elder generation, we'll see what kind of society we and they build. So it's very curious to see, I guess, what general changes on a broader level that will bring, even besides the technology question.
Yeah, because as we start to weed out non-humanist, the inhuman work practices that we have, and start to automate that and start to offload those duties to machines, as we start to do that, the things that we're going to be left with are the things that people actually want to do. And then I think we're going to start seeing people change how we view productivity, instead of being a measure of hours that you're working to the quality of things that you start to make.
Yeah. And I think the challenge of that is whether or not, from an economic perspective, how quickly that can become sustainable, right?
Yeah.
Because currently like you said, we have an hours-based compensation structure, right? Generally. Yeah. And I think that's something that would need to change first for that to become a sustainable thing. I think, and that's, again, part of the complexity of this, because these aren't simple things we're talking about here. It's easy to paint it in broad strokes, but I think it's important for us to bring that nuance, is the fact that people do still need to put food on their table. And I think you and I are both all about that, right? A more human-centered work structure where people can do the part of creativity that they love more. However, the scary part again is the human element, and the corporate decision makers, the people who pay other people's bills, right? Is how quickly will they be able to change and adapt to the fact that humans can be more productive now, right? And because the worst case scenario, right, is kind of at their mercy, right? Of basically still requiring the same amount of output. Still requiring the same amount of output for things that can be done way faster, right? And if that's the case, then like that is going to be what ultimately makes it difficult for people to make their living. And that is ultimately something that is an issue with people and with institutions, and not ultimately with the tools. Because again, tools improve on cycles throughout history in drastic ways, and this is just a new one. And the world is going to change because of it, as it always has, but we're going to find a way to survive. But the question is, how just is that survival going to be, right? And who's going to be making the decisions that affect those adjustments, right? And who's going to, because at the corporate level, increased productivity is purely good, right? But the problem is the people who do the work at the ground level don't always get to see the residuals of that. And so that is mainly the difficulty and the issues and the scary things that are ahead of us. Yeah,
because no one person, no institution has the answers right now. And it's worth noting that even if you're sitting here thinking, you, dear listener, sitting here thinking, I don't know what's going to come, what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to come next. Does anybody have an answer? It is worth noting that we're all trying to figure this out at the same time, and much, much smarter people than us and much smarter people than you are currently working on it. It's a known problem, and it's something that I feel needs to be like taught more often, is that it's okay to not know. It's okay to not have an answer, because most people don't. The whole part, like the whole thing that we're doing living on this planet, is trying to figure it out. And that's kind of, in my personal opinion, figuring it out is kind of the point. It's not to find the answer, it's to go through the process of it. And we're all trying to do that at the same time. It's just that the problems that are coming up now are happening much faster and having much more impact. But it's, in the grand scheme of things, it's all the same problems. It's somebody has developed a tool to make things go faster and to make certain jobs trivial that used to be difficult. So now what used to be hard for a human to do, anybody can now do. And therefore, does that make that human who used to do that hard thing, does that make them less valuable? These are the questions that we have to answer. And it's only going to change how we... It's only going to change everything. That's all. That's the large and small of it. So it's scary, but I don't think it's scary for the reasons people think that they're scared about it. I think people are scared for the wrong reasons. It's not. Also, there's a lot of people who are scared, like on behalf of artists, right? As well.
Yeah, that is also true. I've seen a lot of that.
And that's a whole different problem. That's just a bunch of people who need something to do on the internet. Artists will be fine. We're going to continue making stuff. I want to talk a little bit as well about using AI, because we've talked about AI as a general kind of abstract thing that's kind of existing out there in the world, because that's how a lot of people are thinking about AI. It's just a thing that exists over there. But like, I am looking at my computer screen right now, and I have a generative chat AI open that I was using earlier to generate some responses for the last podcast.
Really?
So there. Could you tell, Raph? Because a long time ago, if you go back and listen to the first episode, it was talked about our creative heroes, and I talked a lot about it, a lot of different people.
At least the 25th episode, but the first episode of season 2.
First episode of season 2. The first episode of season 2, we're talking about our creative heroes, and I talked about a lot of different people, all of which I hadn't thought about in many years. So I needed a refresher. Instead of doing all that research myself, I had a generative AI person thingy do it for me. Because all it does, right, is I could do that work on my own. of just saying, okay, I remember this person's name. Now they taught this person and they're important because type. Oh, right. I have to watch this entire special to figure out why I like them again. this whole 1 hour, or I can just have a generative AI do all that in an instant.
Yes.
It's the same thing. I come to the same conclusion. It's the exact same thing as if I had spent that hour sitting down going, I need information on Di Vernon, on Ricky Jay, and on The Amazing Randy. People which I haven't thought about in years. Or I can just plop it into a generative AI and say, give me some information about these names. Boom, done. Okay, I remember that now.
Yeah, and that's one of the great values, I think, of the text-based generative AIs, because, and I've heard about that being applied oftentimes. Apparently, they make very useful writing assistants, and and that's why I think it's pretty great that I think in the current writer strike that's going on, right? Part of the issues that play in the both strikes are AI based issues and AI ethics, but I kind of like that they're not trying to get barred the use of AI entirely. I think I would be very skeptical of that.
It's impossible to do so anyways.
It's also impossible to do so, but it's but like reserving it to the place of a assistive tool, which is the way I know a lot of writers are already using it, right? To basically do what you just did as a research assistant, as something of that nature. And apparently they're actually very good at that, arguably they're better at it than they are at everything else, right? They can't create a convincing fiction for sure, but like they can research the heck out of something. And it's interesting to hear how that's actually
compiling information is what they're good at.
Yeah. And that's another field it's disrupting that may actually be for the best is the search engine industry, because apparently they have become.
I have stopped using search engines. Yeah. Sure.
Apparently AIs are brilliant new versions of search engines that in many ways are more intuitive to use because you engage with them in a conversational fashion, which is the way most people want search engines to work, right? Like most people ask Google questions when they try to come up with their search query. Yeah. It's like the AI is actually designed to be asked questions in that way and have your search query worded in that way. And so in many ways, it's just a much more organic search engine.
Yeah. The only time I ever use search engines now is if I know what I'm looking for, which is, I didn't realize there was a difference, right? Before, where I now use a generative AI to give me things that I don't know. If I know what I'm looking for, I go to our search engine because I say, give me this thing. I need to find I need to find this PDF. I know what it is. I just don't have it. So find it for me. It does. I download the PDF. Right. But if I need information on a thing like research or whatever, I used to, type that into a search engine, click on every single link and read them. But now I don't need to do that. If I need to find information on something I don't know, if I don't know what I'm looking for, hitting up a generative AI algorithm is just the fastest way to do that because it does that work for me. It clicks all the links and it generates a summary of all those web pages.
Yeah. So, this has been definitely an interesting conversation and has gone in a number of directions I actually wasn't expecting. When I set out to have this as one of our themed topics, I definitely wasn't expecting necessarily this conversation to come out of it because this has been a little bit more therapeutic, I think, in nature than I was expecting. It really,
it's a little bit more.
Yeah. So, but that being said, I kind of want to get at the core of what our title was intimating to close this out. What do you think the future of art looks like in this post-AI world?
We already said we couldn't predict it, but I'll give you my best shot. So,
in broad strokes,
I'm already a huge proponent of using AI and using generative AI as a tool for furthering your creative process, right? The only thing that I think that's going to change is, well, again, like I said before, like it's going to change everything, but what I think it's going to change is it's going to change how we approach productivity. Productivity is no longer going to be numbers based. It's no longer going to be how many hours you sat at your computer finishing a rendered piece, right? Because now that can be done in seconds with a generative AI. What instead is going to happen is productivity is going to be based on it's going to be more conceptual. So if you wanted to create, let's say, an art portfolio, you used to have to spend days, hours on every single individual piece. But now that can be assisted, if you can use a generative AI program to finish your renders, you can pump those out like crazy, right? So instead of having an individual piece of art represent your entire the result of your productivity, it will be your entire portfolio will be the result of your productivity. Yet the concept, if you want to produce a art portfolio of like, let's say, fantastic realistic angels, which is a very cool specific thing that I like to follow. There's this one guy who puts out like an angel concept thing.
Oh, like
and they're all the angel, what's it called?
The
Like
biblically
angel
accurate angels thing? Are you talking about that?
I have no idea. No, not they weren't biblically accurate angels. They were just like these concept arts of like angels that represent different things. And it's fantastic. But the entire portfolio is what's fantastic about it. Each individual piece is great, but the entire portfolio, the entire art book of these angels is what draws you in, right? It's not taking each thing as an individual. And I think that's what we're going to move towards is an artist's, like the quality of an artist's body of work will be judged more instead of their individual pieces, because each individual piece can be cranked out. And like anybody can, create an individual illustration now just by typing it into your favorite image generator. But just because you made one image doesn't make you an artist. An artist tells a story. An artist brings their point of view, right? So even if you just purely used a generative AI image creation software, just doing a handful, that doesn't make you an artist. What makes you an artist is using that to create a story, to tell a story. And then suddenly now you're an artist if you have something to say using these images that are generated by an AI, even though each individual piece in itself doesn't have a like your personal touch. You still use that to create a timeline of, you can create a portfolio of images that will tell your story, and that's what you're going to be judged on, as opposed to each individual image. Yeah,
really what it sounds like is you're talking about scale, like essentially the scale at which we judge or measure things.
Sure,
is kind of what's going to change, which I guess is ultimately the one big thing that does change every time an industrial revolution happens, right? Is the scale.
Yeah.
And
we're going to get a lot more artists like Beeple.
Everyone's Beeple now. So yeah, that being the case, I think kind of for my conclusory statements, where I see the future of art being, like I said, this, leaps in technology, as we've pointed out, happen pretty frequently and have been happening more and more frequently. And this is a bit of a quantum leap as far as, technology goes. And I think that's why it feels very, it's happened in a very short period of time and is very sudden and very drastic. And that being the case, though, I think historically, we have had tools that have made, let's look at one sort of art trade, for example, of like the maker community, right? And we have had tools that make manufacturing and fabrication a lot easier and a lot more machine oriented and a lot more precise and exact and replicable. And that has not killed the handcrafting trade. In fact, it has made handcrafted items more expensive than they were before those tools were available. Because now that is a lot more sought after and a lot more niche and has an artisan's touch, which you cannot get on a mass-produced version. And I think that's basically the way that all art is going to go in the future. Color me optimistic, but I think it's essentially, ideally, the same sort of thing. We're just not used to the forms of art that are currently being affected in that way. Yeah. We've seen it happen with other art forms, like with makers and fabricators, like I said, right? With physical prop designers, filmmakers. We're used to seeing other things get affected this way. But I think what's disruptive about the current AI boom is that it's things that we thought would never get affected this way are currently getting affected this way. But I think, again, there's always solace to be found in precedent. And we have a solid precedent for art becoming more generative and becoming easier at a astounding level. And it has not killed handcrafting. Like I said, it only made it more valuable. And ideally, I think that's what will be happen with the art forms that are currently getting intruded by AI is, I think writing painting, right, illustrating, things of that nature, I think the human version of that is going to increase in value because it, in a way, the market will be saturated with, the opposite of that, because anybody can pump out high quality renders now. But imagine one made by a human is what people will say. Imagine one with a specific artisan's touch, with a specific person's voice. Right? Because voice
with their point of view.
Yeah. Because like you said, I like your use of the term point of view, right? Or voice in
not mine. I'll tell you about that later. not my term.
Oh,
Adam Savage said that in a not an interview, but one of his
is that his recent AI talk?
Live streamed things. Yeah.
I saw that recommended to me. I didn't watch it, but watch it. Adam Savage is great.
I'll listen to him talk about anything. He goes off on a tangent at some point and it's great.
Point of view. Voice, as I like to call it, right? Like that is the one thing that AI cannot replicate, because like I said, we cannot reduce art to techniques, right? Because art is a product of artists, and that is ultimately what is all the more valuable, and that has value. I could get into a lot of different tangents of this, but for me, like on a spiritual level, right? Like that has more value, right? Like we are talking about like literal image bearers in my worldview. And so the, image bearers of God. And so there is something there. And so in a certain extent, I have a spiritual stake in the idea that that AI can never fully replicate an artist's touch, right? Because if it could, then it would kind of throw my whole worldview into question, right? There has to be something about humanity that is different, right? That cannot be calculated. And what AI can do, right, is now very advanced calculations that can very precisely imitate technique. But art is more than just technique. Art is intentionality, it is voice, it is purpose. And that is something that always must come first from a human. And the hand artisan's touch, I think, for these trades that are currently being affected are still going to remain a premium and are going to remain sought after because they're premium. And like I said, in an ideal world, may become more valuable because of that saturation. And so that's kind of my conclusion. That's, I guess, in an abstract way, how I kind of foresee the future of art after this new AI industrial revolution.
So let me say that same thing, but in a different way. I will be scared of the AI revolution the moment an AI creates something without being told to. Until that happens, I'm fine.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. If an AI, without being coded to create something, that's the moment that I'm going to be, that's when I'm going to start pooping myself, because that's not supposed to happen.
Something.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything that an AI does, it's being told what to do, and it's doing it extremely well. The problem is that it's not necessarily original. Like it didn't come out of nothing, right? It was coded to do this thing. It just does it better than most people.
And then it was prompted to do that thing by a human as well.
Yeah, even if it wasn't prompted, it was still coded to do something. I have one last thing to say.
Okay, one last thing.
That might be the most controversial thing that I say on. Not controversial. Let's just say it's not controversial. It's intentionally venomous about the kind of people who are the kind of artists, let's say, who are scared of the incoming AI revolution.
Ooh, save the hot take for last.
You can tell me to cut this out if you want. The kind of artist who is scared of AI taking over their jobs are the people who are quickly finding out that they aren't as creative as they think they are.
Oh, snap.
That's it.
Get wrecked. No,
that's all I'm saying. There are some people that I've seen who are like, like this AI art can pump out stuff that's indistinguishable from mine. So I was like, okay, so can you create anything different? No, not really. It's the one thing I do.
Okay, I think that is your classic provocative way of wording it, but I get what you mean. I think that is very quite true, right? Because again, it's getting back to, anything a machine can do, right?
Yeah.
I think what a lot of people are saying is a machine can do what I do, right? if that is what you're admitting to,
and that truth is being thrust into their face.
yes, if that is what you're admitting to, then you have some self-reflection perhaps to do, because, and I don't think it's just optimistic to say, right? That I think for anybody who is an artist with a true voice, with a true thing to say, an AI cannot replace you. Mm-hmm. It just cannot be done. And I would like to think that of myself. I don't think an AI can do what I do, because what I do is not just putting words to a page.
Yeah, exactly.
So that being said, I think that's a good place to wind things down. And or something, a better note. Like I said, this ended up being a bit more therapeutic than I was expecting. And by no means, as I think this is supposed to be a sort of defensive AI, because I don't think we're ultimately too defensive about it. But I think you do have to deal with the reality of the fact that it exists, and that Pandora box cannot be closed once it has been opened. So it is definitely here to stay, just because there's no way it's not going to be. So that being the case, rest assured, we got a lot to give us peace of mind in all of this, but it's going to be
a long road.
Different and difficult, and it's going to be a long road. Yeah, for sure. So thank you all very much for listening. Until next time, we'll see y'all later. God bless.
See ya.